good is snow on a Saturday? What good is snow on a Saturday? A Monday, a Tuesday, a cold and snowy Wednesday, Thursday or a Friday dawn, and we'll be checking out the lawn. And what good is snow on a Saturday if you are a kid in school?
Hello, and welcome to Chapter 6 of Classroom Management. This is the first part of the second section of our book of Classroom Management as a System. And we're dealing with two philosophers, Kerwin and Mendler, who talk about a system of management called discipline with dignity, and we'll look into what that means as we go through the process in there. What they say basically is we want to try to maintain the student dignity while dealing with discipline situations. In other words, we're not going to humiliate the student. We're not going to call their character as a person into question here. We're still, once again, going to be talking about looking at behavior and helping the student and the teacher both to determine what those causes are in the process. But this is a systematic approach. It's basically a 1, 2, 3 type approach that Kerwin and Mendler have set up. We're going to look at how it affects your teaching style, and we're going to look at what are the kinds of appropriate consequences for misbehavior, because I think we've already understood that there are a lot of different types of inappropriate consequences that we could do, and we've gotten into where we could choose from a range of different types of things. Then we got to looking into where making sure that the consequence match the misbehavior, and I think we're looking at determines which of the more appropriate ones are the right consequences to use for that way. And for the first time, or really maybe the second time now, we're talking about looking at prevention. I see the word prevent right there in the PowerPoint that talks to be able to prevent situations from occurring in the first place. That is the critical point that you want to reach at some point in your teaching career, trying to prevent as many things as you possibly can. You'll never be able to prevent everything, but you can shoot a lot of the preliminary things out of the way so that the only things that actually occur are the more serious things, or things that you should have the opportunity to spot early enough, even if you can't prevent them, to be able to sort of keep them from getting too serious. And for the first time now, we have a philosopher or a philosophy that says we're going to talk about strategies for dealing with students who have the potential for violence and aggression. Up until this point, the other folks have just had the sort of escape plans where you send them off to the office, where that's the do not pass go, do not collect $200, just go straight to jail situation here. But we're looking at helping teachers to find ways for dealing with violence and aggression. As I said, it was developed by Alan Mendler and Richard Kerwin. It says that, and I truly believe that effective discipline, and it's right here in red, comes from the heart and soul of an individual teacher. That your personality, the way you have planned, the way you design what you're going to be doing with your classroom determines how effective your discipline is. And they reject the concept of the one-size-fits-all program. Which one of our programs most definitely closely fits that one-size-fits-all process? If you came up with Cantor, that's right. Because remember, Cantor had one set of rules and one set of consequences for no matter who did it, no matter what happened. And I think he probably most closely fits that definition. So he goes against that. He says everybody should be treated with dignity, that that both teachers and students have a right to these needs for personal identity, for connectedness, both with each other as students and between the teacher and student, to be able to have a sense of control over what's going on in your life, and to be able to achieve academically. And we've talked about several places where we have to help our students, especially those students who are failing or really struggling, to sense that as I say, the sweet wine of success in anything that you can find for them to do, so they can begin to seek that feeling again by working hard academically. Some of the principles behind this, and I'm glad that Kerwin and Mendler mentioned this first. It's mentioned in there early in the chapter. It says the teachers should look at their own reactions and their actions that create problems in a classroom. And that can be with lesson plans, that could be with classroom arrangement, it can be the way you react to what something happens. But their premise here, and this is a very important point you should remember, that problems just don't occur spontaneously. There is always some external thing that never happens in a vacuum, meaning no external influence, no other things. Things just don't spring up spontaneously. There's always something that generates that behavior. And what they're wanting to do is to look at what is that cause. I think this is, once again, a more touchy-feely approach to disciplining students, where you say that the goal here is to help students make appropriate choices and decisions. And this is, once again, where you heard me mention earlier in one of the earlier lectures about teachers asking students, are you making a good decision here? Is that a good decision you just made? To help the student self-reflect, to self-evaluate, to determine, did I or did I not, oops, I forgot to stop and think what I did. And that's a very critical point in taking self-responsibility for things. But sometimes we have to allow them to make mistakes and suffer the consequences. And I think those can be learning situations for a lot of students. Now here's another one of those divided principles. We had another thing that was an 80-something and 80-15-5. That had to do with the different types of problems. Here it talks about the students, the breakdown of students, where they believe that 70% of the students rarely break the rules. And you'll find that's true. 20%, only 20% of the students. So in a classroom of 20 students, that's really only, what, 4 that break the rules on a regular basis. And only 10% of the students are chronic rule breakers. So you may only have 2 chronic rule breakers in your classroom. Now that rule may vary. You may end up with 5 in some classrooms and none in others. But for the most part, this holds true in my experience in the 15, 16 years that I have been teaching, that the majority of your students rarely break the rules, and even if they do, sometimes it's very often a mistake, and they're instantly sorry for it, and you really don't have to worry about correcting them again. But this is the 70-20-10 principle. Write that one down. By the way, anytime you need to, hit pause on here, hit your, move your cursor and click the equals sign over there to pause things, and write some things down or look things up, because we're going to be referring to several places in the textbook if you want to. Then hit play and come back. That will help you to kind of stay on top of what's going on here. 3-part plan: prevention, action, resolution. Trying to prevent things, which is 90% of the model. I love the way that this says that prevention is 90% of your success. That once something happens, we'll figure out what action to do, and a resolution must be happening. In other words, we have to find a finishing part to this that returns back to number 1 in terms of a way of preventing it from happening again. Let's look at part 1, prevention. Now, take a moment and hit the pause button there, and if you have your textbook, read the part on page 103 that Kerwin and Mendler say in paragraph 1 about prevention, about the social contract, where there is a sort of an understanding of students of, I need to do this in order to achieve that. And part of that is that the teacher needs to be able, the teacher and the students create classroom principles, a list of rules if they're needed, and a range of consequences, but it's not specified exactly which they should be. Let's look at those in some detail in a moment. The classroom principles are things that are not like bring pencils or books to class, but much broader in scope. Things like, we believe all students have the right to learn. We believe that a teacher has to be able to teach in the classroom, and we'll do nothing to prevent that from happening. That's a very broad thing that doesn't talk about specific instances or situations. However, the teacher has to think about their own values in terms of what they want to have as part of those classroom principles. Here's a sample of them. However, I'm not completely fond of this, but it gives you the example, and I referred to part of this just earlier. It says, we believe all students should be treated with dignity and courtesy. We believe we have the responsibility of helping everyone learn. We'll do nothing that prevents our teacher from teaching or anyone from learning. We will show respect for each other, our teacher, our classroom, and the school. And there are classes, especially I've seen this in middle school and in elementary school, where in part of the morning thing, the entire school recites their school-wide principle. By the way, there's a difference between spelling between principle like this, meaning a type of rule, and principal, meaning the office, the person in charge of the school, which is P-A-L. Remember that difference. You don't want to misspell that when you go to put it on a job application. Now, in the classroom rules, here, for one of the first times, Kerwin and Minter suggest that the teacher and the students make the rules together. Now, that doesn't mean you don't have to have certain flag rules to start school. Basic rules, no running, no weapons, things like that. Things like this, no touching anyone without permission, no cheating. Those are basic rules that you can certainly start every school day on. But then you can work with the class, and it doesn't really matter what grade level you're talking with. It works greater in some of the middle grades where they're beginning to explore their independence and their maturity. They like to get into that. But it doesn't necessarily have to just be stuck with middle school. And then it says the class votes on the rules. Once you get everybody settled to agreement, saying this is the way we're going to state our rule, get the class, and only 75% have to agree. Why would it not be 100% of the rules? 100% of the students agree. Why would you not want 100% instead of 75%? Now, if you immediately thought about that group of chronic rule breakers, which is 20% of your students, plus a few more that could be followers on, then you know you're never going to get those everybody to get 100% on that, because they know they're going to be the ones who are going to break that rule and get in trouble for it. So if you can get 75%, you can still use peer pressure by saying, look, our class voted, and we had a majority vote on this here. 75% of our students agreed to this rule, and you've broken it. That's why you have to suffer the consequences. You can use that, especially with the more mature students who have the wider range of thought with things. And then once you set those rules up, then you can post them. Have the students keep a copy of them in their folders, in their journals. Here's some examples. Students will not swear or curse. We can have specific things in terms of rules like this. Students will make racist, sexist, threatening things like this. And it's surprising. You can lead the students by the kind of choices of topics into helping them to determine what are the kinds of rules they want to make. Because you can ask, now, should we make rules about how we should talk in class? And let the students then, you can give them the kinds of choices where they can, you can lead them around to coming into the kinds of rules that will be both practical and enforceable for you. Of course, students will not bring weapons or items, but these are flag rules. A flag rule is different from a classroom rule in that usually flag rules are set by the school administration. They're non-negotiable. They come and they apply to every school, every class, every room. That's different than the individual classroom rules. I got off task here in a moment, too busy worrying about the individual classroom rules. Flag rules, flag meaning the flag that flies over the school. If it flies over one classroom, it flies over the entire school. These are rules that are school-wide rules, things like no cheating and things like that. Consequences, you can maybe set a generalized list, but say that I'm not bound by this in terms of consequences. Kerwin and Minter just say to give students the idea of the kinds of things they could suffer for breaking a rule, then you could list some of those things and maybe even make a list of small, medium, and large, if you want to, consequences for some of those things. The critical point, once a rule has been broken and a student has done something wrong, is you must remind them of the rule that's been broken. It's so effective. One of the things that you must do with students is to remind the students which rule has been broken. You must make them specifically tell you which rule was broken. It's easy for you to say it. They'll just sit there and be mute. But to force them to tell you which rule was broken does something to them psychologically, where they know what rule has been broken. They know exactly what it is, even if they play I don't know with you. They do. But making them say it to you, that admitting it out loud, is a critical part of helping a student to heal, to be able to admit it, to understand they did something wrong, and to go on about it and never to break that rule again. Use your proximity control. Get in their personal space, not so much that you generate a negative reaction, but let them put the heat on by getting close into there. It helps if you get down to eye level and bring your voice down. In fact, it says on the next slide here, when we're just the action to do. You need to the action that you do here is stop the discipline problem immediately and prevent the minor problems from becoming major. We remind the student which rule has been broken. We use that power of that proximity control, get in their face. Make direct eye contact when you're doing this. Now, that doesn't mean stand above them. They can get eye contact this way, but if you can get down to their eye level this way and get in their sort of their personal space like that, it certainly puts the psychological heat on and lets them understand this is serious business and we're about to solve it. Be consistent and use a soft voice. Also, part of this applying consequences is acknowledging when they have appropriate behavior. And don't now, when it talks about don't embarrass the students in front of their peers, it means don't humiliate them in front of their peers. They're going to be embarrassed when you stop them and start lowering the boom on them right then. And you can certainly do it in a quiet way. And some places where you may be able to do it in front of the class, that's still not going to be humiliating for the student. But never give a consequence when you're angry. The tendency is to over punish or to deliver it in a way that can be humiliating to the students. You're not in control. Remember, you're the adult in the classroom, and you need to be the person delivering the consequence. Number 9, do not accept excuses. Well, I didn't mean to. Well, I'm sorry, I'll never do it again. They bargain it. If you'll just let me get through this time, I promise I'll turn my homework in from now on. Don't ever please don't give me a 0. My mom will kill me or my dad will. All that whining because they become expert actresses and actors in that process. Don't accept that, because when you fall into one, then that will open the door for all the others to try to bargain for you. Understand that that if they've broken the rule, let them know this is the rule you broke. We're not talking about what happens the next time. The next time you're not going to break the rule. That's right. So that you explain that to them, and don't get into that, because they'll get into the whining and bargaining, and because many of them have been allowed to get away with that for much of their life. Being able to bargain their way through misbehavior, bargain their way through poor behavior or doing whatever they want to, anarchistic behavior, because they just want to be able to do that and see if they can wheedle their way out of it. So don't accept those excuses when you go to applying this process. Now, the resolution part has to do with those 5 to 10% of problem students who just can't seem to deal with following rules. This is the plan that you put. It's sort of a mini IEP, and I referred to this one in one of the earlier types of plans too. It's the same type thing where you put this plan in writing, you contact parents, and you say to them, your child is breaking this rules, and this is a behavior rule breaker, not an academic type thing that you may be helping a student with. But it's a behavior thing where you set them up a plan. If you go all day without getting a negative comment about your jumping up in class or speaking out too loud in class or pushing and shoving, something like that, then we can literally start to count it in that process. Set up, make sure that both parents and school and guidance counselors, school administration and guidance counselors all know about that process so that everybody's knowing up front. Read the page in the text, page 111, about dealing for students who display violent behavior. It talks about being as tough as you need to be in order to do it. We have to help students understand they've got to make effective, correct choices in order to survive in this world, and they need to start learning it now before the real world consequences put them away for more serious misconduct in there. We've got to help them find a way to express other means, and I've spoken about this several times in class about finding alternative means for expressing anger and frustration to keep them from going to violence. Okay, strengths and upsides and downsides. The upside is it requires the teacher to look at your contribution to the problems. You have to do that mirror work where you have to stop and say, what was going on in that classroom that I contributed to that may have caused this misbehavior? Did I allow too much noise to go on in the classroom or too much chatter to go on in between? Did I let the class get too loose, or was I too tight? Was I moving too fast with the material, etc.? All those things. Start looking at yourself and your lesson plans and your presentation and the circumstances to see if you had any contributing factors to that part. And this is based on a feedback from a lot of teachers who told them that was a big part of the problems a lot of times. And so we have to learn. That's how we learn to improve as a teacher. The downside is they say, well, this is really not much different from other models that we've seen, and I believe it is very similar to some of the other things that we've looked at in terms of the consequences and things. It's less structured, but it still has the rules and the consequences involved. The difference here to me is that it allows the students to contribute to the rule creation. There's a certain amount of buy-in that goes in here. When students create the rules, when they vote on the rules, when they are allowed to help create the ways by which we in our little micro community of a classroom are going to behave, then they have a buy-in to it, a certain responsibility into it. And you can use that as a leverage against your students. Now, there are some people who might object to rule development by students, and I want you to think about that. Why would some teachers object to letting students develop rules? Why would teachers not want to allow students in any process in there to develop the rules? I think people who object to that don't understand the process by which a teacher can constructively lead students to create good rules, by asking leading questions, by guided choices in the process where students can create rules that are effective and good rules and be happy with that. And frankly, if you find that a rule is too strong or too weak, you can bring it up in class and say, I believe we need to restructure this rule. Let's look at it and talk about it. And you can even bring that up and let the students decide whether or not they want to change that rule. So the next things up is COMP, the Classroom Organization Management Program, or Classroom Organization Management Plan, created by Dr. Carolyn Evertson. So that'll be coming up. Be sure and read your chapter summaries and your pieces at the end of Chapter 6 for any other information you may need to, and then we'll discuss this more and do the little quiz in class the next time we meet. Good luck, and I'll see you next with COMP. Bye.